Overthinking academics who remove humanity from their chosen academic focus, mainly in the arts and humanities, are beyond angry with me. I am beyond frustrated with the Greeks being overexcited by silly postmodern acolytes who, using a generous brush, paint fantastical pictures of the past under the guise of inclusion or diversity. Even though homosexual relationships did exist in ancient Greece, their prevalence has much to be desired. It is embarrassing to read about them and even grosser to discuss them in school. The humanities are pushing to separate sex and love into different categories as part of the cultural themes of academies. Love has become a literary device, an emotion that can be irrational or even mythical. The study of love has been usurped by the study of sexuality, a modern intention to separate the act of sex from the act of love. Instead of being read or explored, it now stands in the dusty and forgotten corners of the library. When checking the dates of the many books and papers written, one would discover that most of them were written in the 1960s and 1970s, when sex liberation was taking off, due to the invention of contraceptives, such as birth control. Let us look at a theme that goes hand in hand with love, war. It seems to be the violent reality of the ancient Greek life. Their understanding of love was accompanied by violence. Rape and bloodlust seem to permeate Greek mythology, from the raping of Cassandra to the raping of Troy. However, no scholars seem to point out this undeniable connection. Instead, they look for ghosts in naked Greek men and say they might be lovers. Alternatively, they look at the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus and say, what a fine, loving, gay couple that is. Perversions say very little about the Greeks, as they say much more about the people writing them. This is so painfully obvious that it makes my head spin that no one has pointed this out. As I look around me, the histories and humanities are becoming more and more dominated by female academics who mostly fall under the persecution of woke ideology, if one can even call it an ideology. There are a few reasons why this could even happen in the first place. One is that male academics choose to pursue a career in STEM, or they choose to leave academia altogether. The reason is that the increasing female perspective goes unchallenged, dominated now by poor scholarship, which rips and dissects documents, translated from the original language, and then twists and tears the already understood and beautiful meaning of pre-modern documents into self-serving feminist ideological constructs. This is due to a misunderstanding of the material. However, sadly, it has to do more with the state of education in line with activism, a social relationship also permeated in the 1960s and 1970s. When the sexualization of the classics and classical culture was taken into play in the early 19th century by European scholarship, we correctly understood that all attempts to understand history fell under the language of imperial implications. As we are very aware today that imperialism is bad, says the sheep, we cannot help but not see our sin and hypocrisy when relating to history today. We proudly blame the past for interpreting the past wrong, and then continue the insane work to create more philosophy, which serves our purposes today. It makes me sick to think about the many times I found myself battling some woke female mob of self-righteous Amazons, hell-bent on an intrinsic understanding that the Greeks were gay and hated women when they claimed the same in their own lives, in a society that had liberated them from the so-called oppression of the home and the horrors of patriarchal control. However, the men they despise and act against protect their freedoms and privileges. They teach this ideal to their children, feminizing their sons and corrupting their daughters with thoughts of activism. These ideals are reinforced by the never-ending echo chamber with his social media and school, preparing them to teach those same principles to their children until the Greeks are no longer Greek, but are called ancient Mediterranean, white-passing, democratized patriarchal peoples, because that is all academia is now, reorganizing and relabeling contracts to fit into a new narrative, much like how women do when they change the labels and reorganize their kitchens and living rooms every 6 months. This operation of reorganization is the very definition of insanity. The worst thing about this is that all aspects of current society support this. It is progressed through social media and reinforced by academia under the guise of a well-rounded education. We expect so much of our students in the United States, but desire so little work. The amount of busy work given to students almost makes diving into the depth of the content almost impossible. So thus, people naturally settle for an easy way out in trying to engage with material history through context. However, one must have developed a large corpus of material to arrive at an appropriate context. However, reading anything and correctly interpreting it is becoming increasingly more work. Thus, the bare minimum work style is accepted, and students and teachers are left with the void of creation at their fingertips. Some professors try to fill this void with a list of facts and trivia to help build a vocabulary to even engage with the material. Some choose to dive right into the classic sources and then, from there, build a context. Some even choose not to look at sources but engage in the active debate which is currently being held. However, all this has one thing in common. It is all decentralized and is based solely on the professor one has. The most humorous thing about all this is that the professor tries to introduce concepts from a wide array of material to show a snapshot, hoping we, the students, will take away something meaningful but still rely on filling the gaps in ourselves. This is correct, but it expects the students to know or even care about the material in the first place. It is hard to be enthusiastic when one cannot engage in a profound debate about the materials and arguments, when one can only develop a context based on what they already have learned, or more importantly, experienced. So the question is, what does the typical student in the humanities and history know? What does a typical 18-year-old student bring in with them? For men, it might be their budding manhood and lack of confidence, and for women, their sense of entitlement and overconfidence. In other words, although college campuses try to create a culture independently, they reflect the culture they bring in. Thus, the mentality of a young 18-year-old is hard to deal with when life has not kicked in their teeth yet, when the pain of old age and experience rest on their brow. Instead, colleges now become both a place to learn and explore the world, and, more critically, academics, the culture and history of their people. Instead, these young students come in with their invincibilities and choose to judge the past rather than understand it, mainly because the ideas of indifference permeate our increasingly callous and sheltered civilization that sits and venerates its moral lap of luxury as the model for the world to emulate. What suffers the most here is not the past, because one cannot change the past. Instead, we in the future are the ones who suffer more. This poor scholarship based on academia-woke lunacy is rooted in the laziness of self-righteous semi-adults who try to dissolve all responsibility between them and their own shadow. They are expected to be eclectic in understanding without an eclectic set of experiences. Thus, ideas like misogynist pedophilic gay Greeks and Pan-African black necrophilic Egyptians have become the norm in the last 200 years. And it will only get worse as more and more students no longer wish to do the work of reading and synthesizing, but instead try to challenge the existing narrative by adding new classifications and models to the already existing collection of extensive cognitive exercises in free association, which is entirely devoid of embodying truth. How can academia survive like this? It won't. I think the disinformation with established education has already begun and is well underway. All we can do is sit back and let it write itself into obscurity. So goodbye, my dear humanities, so long, my beloved history. It was nice while it lasted. Good riddance, my beloved country, my horrible, evil, patriarchal civilization. Au revoir, mankind. Maybe the dolphin AI will do a better job.